What's the difference in being an heir of God and being a fellow heir with Christ? That's what we're going to find out in this episode 18 of Salvation and Discipleship. If you've got your study guide, which you can get at simplybelief.com/grow, notice topic number 18 under salvation says heirs of God, and under discipleship says fellow heirs with Christ. It's important to understand how inheritance worked in the ancient world when these verses were written that we're going to look at. All children would inherit something, and that would be decided by the father. However, the firstborn son would inherit a double portion. The oldest son and also those sons who were responsible would be expected to go into the family business and pick up where their father left off and manage the estate and wealth of their family. So, the verse that we're going to look at today has both heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ. So let's look at that verse, Romans 8:17. Here's what it says. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together. So this verse identifies two different groups. The first group it identifies is what it calls children. And it says that children are heirs of God. If you look in the first chapter of John, we find that all who have believed in Jesus for everlasting life are called children of God. And therefore, they have a general inheritance. What is that inheritance? The two verses right before this, 15 and 16, tell us what it means to be an heir of God. Let's read those. For you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. These verses tell us that the saved person has received a spirit of adoption in which they can cry out to God and say, Abba, Father. In the Roman world, adoption could happen at any age, and when it did, that person's debts would be canceled and all previous relationships. So for the believer who believes in Jesus for everlasting life, they become children of God and they inherit something. It tells us that they inherit not a spirit of fear. And so the condemnation of sin is canceled. Their debts are paid. And so what this means is to be an heir of God is to be saved. It's a general sense that all children of God receive a basic inheritance, and that is the forgiveness of sins and a place in the kingdom of God. Verse 17, however, tells us that there is an inheritance even greater than that basic inheritance that all children of God receive. So all saved people are heirs of God, but not all heirs of God are co-heirs with Christ. In fact, it tells us in this same chapter that Jesus is the firstborn among many brethren. Now remember what we said about firstborn. Firstborn got the biggest portion of inheritance. So the question then arises, in the kingdom of God, who will have the biggest and best inheritance? Well, Paul tells us, since Jesus is the firstborn among many brethren, then Jesus is going to have the greatest inheritance in the kingdom. And in fact, the kingdom will be his. But this verse tells us for those who meet a specific condition, they can also inherit along with Jesus. They can be co-heirs or joint heirs with him. So what's the condition? Well, let's look at the verse and it tells us. And if children, then heirs. So that's talking about salvation. Heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified. So it tells us that if we suffer with Christ, then we can be co-heirs. So everyone who is saved is a child of God and therefore an heir of God. But those who choose to also suffer with Christ, those will be co-heirs or joint heirs with Christ. This goes right back to the division that we've been talking about this entire series, salvation and discipleship. Those who choose on a daily basis to follow a lifestyle of discipleship not only will get that basic inheritance of salvation, but they will get a great inheritance in the kingdom of God. It's a beautiful idea. If you want to go deeper on this one, I would encourage you to get my book, Salvation and Discipleship, Is There a Difference? There's lots more info in this chapter. Also go to simplybelief.com/grow to see our other materials for this Bible study and to get notifications. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.